Today I'm doing something that is probably long overdue. It is a long-term review of the Roland S-1. I've been using this device for over 2 years, so I kind of feel like I have the ability to speak on its pros and cons and recommend it to certain people. This is in no way sponsored by Roland, this is just my personal thoughts. The S1 is extremely portable, and I would say that's one of its strongest suits. I constantly see and hear people taking these on the plane, taking these on trains, taking these on their commute, because it's a relatively simple synthesizer. In some ways, it doesn't have a ton of modulation options, it doesn't have 20 different sequencer options. You can pull this out on your daily commute and get to jamming in basically seconds. I find that extremely useful because when you're learning, if you're just getting into synthesizers, sound design, or music in general, you actually want to be able to have something that you have access to basically whenever you want. The more hands-on time you have with it, the faster and more you are going to learn. This ties in with what I consider a pretty easy learning curve. I've seen people say that the front panel is too complex or the menu diving is horrendous, but I actually disagree with those sentiments. I think the front panel shows you pretty much everything that you need to know for the basics of sound design, and that's extremely useful. There are tons of synthesizers, much more expensive than this, that hide certain features in a menu that the S1 has directly here. This can be really beneficial because if you're just starting out, being able to tweak a dial and it's always in this exact same spot and you don't have to go through any menu to get to it, you can set up a patch, hear how it affects the sound, set up a different patch, hear how it affects the sound, and you get to really connect what you are physically doing and seeing with what you are hearing, and that is just extremely useful if you're just starting out. There is the temptation, you always want gear that has all the abilities. The Deluge has a huge mod matrix. I hear people recommending the Microfreak. The Microfreak is actually what I started out with, and I think I had it for all of 2 or 3 days. It was an awesome machine, and I would love to have one again. I don't really need one right now, so that's why I don't. It's an awesome machine, but it was too abstract in what the synthesizer engines were doing. Whereas this, I think, is very direct. There is no abstract nature if you know the very basics. And even when I started, I didn't even know, really what the different oscillators were or how they worked. But being able to change something and just hear and connect to that action was super great for me. It also, surprisingly, a couple of the things that you wouldn't think of. The USB-C is just super easy. I have a USB-C phone, so it's super easy to charge. If I want to do MIDI control, I just plug it in and it works with the normal cable that I charge my phone with. The in and out mix, mostly the in, is extremely useful for me because I have used this with so many other synths where I'm just like, I just need one more input. My mixer might have 4 and I have 5 devices I'm trying to mix in. I say I'm going to throw that into my S1 and it's basically just free mixer slot. It doesn't apply any of the effects. That's one thing I wish that would happen, if you could pump something in here and apply potentially like a reverb effect. I could see that being super useful with people that do kind of like a tape workflow where they're looping a tape and then they have that going to S1 and applying the effects. That would be super cool if you could have some sort of interaction like that. Lastly, I would say that the S1 is also great if you're kind of going from beginner to advanced, because as you learn more about these concepts, you're actually able to kind of discover the deeper and more hidden advanced features inside of here. For example, instead of just having reverb, you have all these, I think it's 5 or 6 reverb controls. You have different engines, you have different filter cutoffs and times and pre-delays and all that. And that's super beneficial if you're trying to kind of step from step A of sound design to step B, C, and D. And then as well as that, you have chop and draw. I have put out a tutorial on draw, and I'm planning a tutorial on chop. Those are super useful for kind of making what, these 4 oscillators that, are just basic oscillators and turning them into something with a little bit more character and, just adding extra sound design potential. For example, I have a tutorial on making a supersaw. I think that is super cool that you can turn this non-super saw synth into having a super saw. I also love, if you're coming from the original SH-101 or one of the other clones, having it in poly mode is just amazing. Having those 3 extra voices to kind of lay down a chord and then melody over top of it is just super nice. And if it was just a single voice synth, honestly, it would lose a lot of its utility for me, because in the jam, when I'm jamming, which is my kind of typical process with this, is being able to do those layers, and I think that just adds so much to it. So let's get into some of the cons. Starting off, I'm going to say it is a little bit fiddly, but most synths that are this small are going to be a little fiddly. For example, especially one with this many dials. For example, if you are trying to twist a dial, my hands, they aren't even that big, but I am constantly hitting other dials. Usually it's not a big deal because it just kind of knocks it a little bit. But there is a chance, for example, if you load up a pattern and the actual value is all the way at 0, but the knob is pointing at 255, if you bump it just enough, it will actually activate it at 255. And that has messed up jams that I've been recording before, and it's honestly really annoying. So now my typical process is whenever I load up a pattern, I press pattern and then go through every single knob just to make sure everything is actually pointed at the value that is set to. Regarding sound design, I think it's obviously super powerful. You've probably seen my tutorials. It would be kind of cool if they added a kind of custom LFO destination. Maybe even just one would be really fun. For example, if you could, customize, let's say you press LFO, some button like that, and then you turn resonance, and suddenly the LFO is controlling resonance. That would just be really cool, and maybe it replaces one of the other LFO destinations. But it would give a little bit more sound design potential. That would be really crazy if you had that on like delay time. You could get some really funky things and kind of really extend the sounds that you can make with the S1. Also, I don't really like the chorus. I know I think I mentioned this in like 90% of my videos. The chorus is not my favorite sounding. I don't know if it has to do with the routing of the FX or something like that, but something about it just typically doesn't sound that great to me, so most of the times I actually leave it out. The last 2 major cons for me are menu labeling and the pattern management system. Pattern management isn't bad, but I typically need a notebook to kind of say, hey, pattern 416 is my interstellar patch, or pattern 312 is my Tycho patch. It's kind of impossible for you to just remember that. I mean, there's 64 different patterns that can be saved on here, and I typically don't chain, I don't do all of my ones or one song or whatnot, so it's pretty hard for me to remember what is where without some sort of reference. That's not necessarily a negative thing, because I will often say, I also have some jam notes if I'm recording it that, I will refer back to. So it's kind of good to have that all in one place, but at the same time, it would be useful if there was some other kind of way of knowing what is where. I think one thing they could do that would be a major overhaul would be showing if a pattern is used or not. So for example, all of these are, patches or patterns. It would be nicer if they were showing flashing as unused or initialized patches. I find sometimes I'll be like, I need to copy this pattern somewhere. Where can I copy it? And I don't know if I'm about to overwrite, my last favorite patch or something like that. It would just be really nice to know what is initialized or what's not. Going on, some of the menu items are just really ridiculously named that if you were not studying the manual constantly, you would have no idea what they do. For example, BNDO. If you are not looking at the manual, if you are not very familiar with synthesizers and sound design and that sort of thing, and particularly probably Roland products, you're never going to figure out what that means. And there's other options like that in here, like nsend. It's very difficult to kind of interpret from this screen, and I am glad in some ways that it doesn't have like a full LCD. I know a lot of people request that. I don't think there's enough menu options in here to require a full LCD, but it would be nice if some of the menu items were labeled a little more clearly. For example, as well, we have LFO-S and LFO-K, and one of those syncs it to the beat, and one of those syncs it to the key. And, you might know this is a K, but I can barely tell that says K. So every time I want to sync the LFO to a key press, I actually go to LFO-S 90% of the time, and I'm like, oh, let's turn that on. I'm like, why is this not syncing? And then I remember it's actually LFO-K instead. So who is the Roland S-1 for? I would say the best person that should consider this is someone that is new to sound design or new to synthesizers, new to music in general. You can find a lot of utility in this. That's exactly where I was when I started. I had played with synthesizers a couple times, but I knew basically nothing about synthesizers or music, and I just needed something that I could start learning with and hearing what I'm doing is actually having an effect. I had bounced off other instruments before, and it felt like this gave me enough control and enough understanding to really start learning and not be bogged down with options. I basically spent the first year just using stuff on the front panel, and then, maybe occasionally I would dive into one or two menu options, but most of my work is just on the front panel, and even still, I just, if you watch my tutorials, I just maybe modify one or two things in deeper menus. What this means for someone that's just starting out is that you have a really good connection with your device, especially one that doesn't, cost you a ton. I see these constantly going between $1 and $150 US dollars, and I think that's just an absolute steal for how much you can learn on this, especially if you are just you don't want to put a huge investment. You don't want to buy a $400 or $1,000 machine. You can spend a little bit and really get to know it. And I know people will say, oh, you could get software or an iPad app, but there is something about the physicality of this and knowing that every time you pull it out, there's going to be the exact same result. And I really appreciate that. Paired with the ability to kind of take it wherever you want and have a lot of hands-on time with it, you're just going to be maximizing your skill level by really getting to know and understand the machine. Being able to pull it out just whenever is going to let you practice in all sorts of different contexts, in all sorts of different, mindsets, and that's just going to develop your skills so much faster than if you have something that, sits on the desk all the time, but it does everything. The person that probably doesn't need the S1 is someone that has a very well-developed studio with a lot of different controls and all sorts of different sound design options, with the exception if you are looking for something to kind of take away from your studio and get into a different mindset when you work with it. The limited controls of the S1, same for a beginner, just put you in a different place than when you have access to everything. For example, if I just recently bought Ableton, and you can do absolutely everything in Ableton you could ever want, but I'm still coming back to this because if I just need to sketch out an idea, I can do it in mere seconds on here, whereas in Ableton I have to boot up the computer, I have to load the software if I want to use, my instrument to control or something. It's just extra steps that take you away from the learning and music making aspects of things and put you over there. I can take this anywhere I want to go and start making sounds, start jamming out, start enjoying myself, and that's really beneficial. So let me know if you're considering buying the S1. If you have any questions about it, I'd be more than happy to answer them. I still have more tutorials coming out and more videos kind of demoing different ideas and how to interact with it. I actually have a whole series of kind of how to instantly jam on the S1 for new beginners, even if you have very little music theory knowledge. So keep an eye out for my videos. I am going to keep trying to make the best videos that I can for you, and I'm going to keep my S1 for quite a while to come. Thanks so much for watching.